What's the creepiest display of intelligence you've ever witnessed in real life? Story 1. My old cat, who was the eldest of 4 cats I had, was wicked smart. He was insanely clean. We had 2 large litter boxes for the 4 cats. He made the 3 younger girls copy his habits, and they used one litter box only for pee and the other only for poo. I swore up and down to my partner, who at the time didn't believe me. He could understand English, but when I asked sarcastically to get the kitten out from behind the drawer, he just looked at me, went to the drawer, had a conversation with the kitten, and she came right out. We had tried for hours. If my partner didn't see it with her own eyes, LOL. Answer: my cats are very responsive to instructions, and I feel like they actually train us. They also use separate covered litter boxes for pooping. Once my mama cat was standing at the garage door looking up, meowing, howling incessantly. I finally went out to see what it was, and the water heater had electrical wiring that was glowing red hot. She saved us from a potential house fire. Story 2. I worked with a DJ who knew the station's entire catalog by heart. Oh, you want to hear? Please, Mr. Postman. That's CD 472, track 5. He was never wrong, and it made board hopping with him so much easier. Story 3. My dad told me that while he was in college, there was a math problem that neither he nor his classmates could solve. It was about how far a cube of a certain size would move if a bullet of a certain weight was fired at it at a certain speed. He went to sleep and dreamed that he saw the cube being hit by the bullet and realized that he hadn't added the weight of the bullet to the cube because it was now embedded in it. In his dream, he did the calculations, woke up quickly, and wrote down the result. He was the only one in the entire class who was able to complete the problem. Answer: I would do this too. When I was in high school, I'd do my homework, get stuck on a math problem, or just not have the energy to write an essay, then go to sleep thinking about the missing assignments. Without fail, I'd solve the problem or come up with a multi-page essay in my dreams. Then I'd wake up, sometimes in the middle of the night, to write it down. But it always felt like someone else had given me the answer. Story 4. My college roommate could read people like it was a superpower. We'd be at a party, and she'd lean over and say something like, "That couple by the door is about to break up, probably tonight." Or, "The guy in the red shirt is lying about where he works." I used to think she was just being dramatic until I started keeping track. She was right like 90 of the time. Once she told me my boyfriend was about to ghost me 3 days before it happened. I asked her how she knew, and she just shrugged and said, his laugh changed. Still not sure if I should have been impressed or terrified. Story 5. My Doberman DeSoto, rest his soul, was probably the smartest dog I've ever seen. Probably doesn't seem like much, but it was a truly incredible sight that I didn't think dogs did. I was waking up on the couch of my in-laws right before the sun was up and just laid there in the silence. My boy DeSoto didn't know anyone was awake at the time, so he slowly gets up, walks over to one of the windows, props 2 feet up onto the windowsill, and watches the sunrise. He didn't move. He didn't make a sound. He just stood there watching the sunrise. Without a doubt, one of the most profound moments of my life. I could really see the intelligence in this creature. Story 6. I grew up with a guy. One day we were after school finishing a biology project. We had a calculation for so random variables. 6-digit divided by 2-digit, like 179485667 or some shoot. I typed it in the calculator, and before I said it to the team, he gave me the answer. I knew this guy had a weird, it's smart brain. Didn't know the full extent until now, and I asked him, "How the hell did you know that?" He told me he did this calculation once as a 9-year-old, and also he remembered it because it was matching to his favorite for a specific car model, and it stuck with him. I grew up with this guy for 20 years and knew he was wicked smart, but it always stuck in my mind. He also told me that he studied his old sister's AP biology book before he took the class, for fun. Our teacher was a real hard-ass about consistent homework in that class. But if you passed the AP test, you automatically got a passing grade in the class. He never turned in a single piece of homework and got a 5 on the test. Dude was wicked. Story 7. Not really creepy, just unnerving and sobering. Also, not intelligence per se, rather experience and knowledge. A few years ago, my family and I were watching Wall-E with a family friend who used to be a UK Royal Marine. He was and remains a very gentle, easygoing fella in his civilian life. We were watching it with our kids, and we all laughed when Eve first used her blasters, or whatever, as it seemed overpowered. My friend then said, "Well, she's doing risky reconnaissance. I'm not surprised she's heavily armed." Some sobering real-world experience there. Story 8. Watched a kid in calculus solve a derivative instantly that would have taken me probably 3 minutes or so to work out. Completely changed how smart I thought I was. Story 9. I went on a golf trip with a friend of a friend a couple of years ago. He mentioned casually that he was pretty good at remembering numbers. Gave him my credit card at dinner to test his ability, and he took one look, gave my card back, and recited the number back to me perfectly, including expiration date and security code. I thought that was pretty cool, but not overly impressive. He turns up 2 years later at that same golf trip, and just for fun, I ask if he remembers my credit card number. Without hesitation, he closed his eyes, thought for a second, and recited it perfectly, except he flipped 2 of the security code numbers. Needless to say, I'm trying to maintain a good relationship with this guy. Story 10. I once watched a quiet colleague predict our manager's decisions days in advance, adjusting conversations to steer outcomes. He never gave orders, never took credit. People thought coincidences. Only later did I realize he'd mapped personalities like chess pieces and played the room flawlessly, without anyone noticing at all somehow. Story 11. We once had a waitress who took all the orders for a table of 10 without writing them down. This was before the technology that would have aided her. You could see in her eyes that she was somehow memorizing them, cataloging them. She got them all correct. Story 12. My sister was getting perfect grades through elementary school, all 100s and A. I kept telling her, next year will be harder. Nope, all the way through high school, literally perfect. Valedictorian senior year in 2330 out of 2400 on SATs. Accepted to all Ivy League schools and chose Princeton. Guess I was wrong. Story 13. One of my chickens, a leghorn hen named Tilly, was injured in a fight with another hen and had to be brought into our house for care. Tilly had always been borderline feral as she wasn't hand-raised, and that was the first time in her life she let me pick her up. She knew she was hurt, and she knew I was going to help her. I took her in and got her cleaned up and took care of her wound. While I was doing it, I was talking to her in kind of a baby talk voice that the birds like, hoping she would stay calm and not flip out. Chickens definitely know their names, and some will even come running like a dog when you call them. Tilly knew her name prior to this incident, but other than looking at me when I said it, she'd never really responded before. That night, while I was cleaning her up and talking to her, I said her name, and she looked me dead in the eyes and repeated it back at me. It was a 2-tone chirp of BB that was a clear mimicry of me saying Tilly. She kept staring at me, so I said Tilly, and she replied with BB. And we did it back and forth several more times. She stayed very calm the whole time and let me take care of her and even pet and cuddle her. And ever after that, she was very friendly to me, and while I couldn't get her to talk to me like that again, she would do a lot of chicken speak with me that she never used to. Chickens are not like parrots and corvids that are known to mimic human speech and understand human language to the point of having conversational abilities. They're not like African gray parrots or ravens. But I will swear to anything that Tilly, rest her silly little soul, was an unusually special chicken bird. It's amazing how animals can show affection and intelligence when they feel genuine care. Hearing a chicken try to mimic its own name is one of those rare moments you'd remember forever, even if those around you wouldn't likely believe it. Story 14. We used to keep my ferret in the office with a baby gate and a box blocking the exit. One time she dragged an empty cat litter container and through trial and error and readjusting the angles, eventually used it as a launch pad to get onto the box and past the baby gate. Story 15. I had a classmate once who could do complex equations in her head. She was asked to solve an equation of the whiteboard once with it working, but only wrote the answer. When the teacher asked her to show how she got to the answer, she just said, I can't. Of course, the teacher made her do a few more, and yep, all right. The scariest part is supposedly her sister was even smarter than her. Answer. I can solve calculus in my head. In primary school, I would turn in my tests with all of the answers but no work. I had one teacher, Ms. Alexander, God rest her soul. She made me rewrite all of my work in our off period, and I'm very thankful she did. I am now going into data analytics business consulting, and the only way I get paid is by showing my work. Story 16. We were studying and she recognized a young man from an anatomy textbook. She said it was from her 3rd grade math book. We didn't believe her and made fun of her, so one day she showed up with that book. Same young man, totally different pose and environment, obviously some stock photos. She still works in medicine, but works with the police several times a year for super recognizer screenings or whatever that's called. When we would go out, she would see someone and just go, this guy was at the lake 4 years ago when we were there. We all just stopped confirming with those people because She was always right and it was always creepy. Answer. My BF has eidetic memory for faces. He never forgets a face, even if it only passes by a few seconds. One time he saw an Instagram story of a friend who was traveling in Turkey. This friend was on a boat. He realized that the captain on the boat was the captain he saw 10 years ago, when he was traveling on a boat to some remote island in Turkey. I have the opposite of this. It's called face blindness, I think. I have to meet someone a few times and have had some proper conversations, not just small talks, before I can remember their face. Story 17. Friend's brother, he's an Englishman, a linguist, went with my friend to Norway for a conference. My friend went with to hang out and be a tourist. He didn't speak any Norwegian before he went. On day 3, he could read it and order at the restaurant and conduct their business in Norwegian. By the end of the week, he was fluent. He told me that Hollywood-style, universal eidetic memories are bullshit, but some people have specialized ones. In his, as he can remember every single thing he has ever read, down to location on the page. He won't be able to tell you when he read it or anything like that, just the actual content. Conversely, he doesn't understand machines at all. Friend found him one day making coffee in the frying pan he just made eggs in because he couldn't figure out the coffee machine. Answer. I'm not as strong as your friend's brother, but if I read something, I'll remember where it was physically, not the page number, but how thick each half of the book was in my hands, so I can get quite close to the exact page, and whether it was on the right or left page, and how far down the page, and in which paragraph, and how far into the paragraph. Story 18. I knew a kid who had an intellectual disability. He was nonverbal and needed one-to-one support all day, every day. However, pull out a 500-piece puzzle, he puts it together upside down, as in, the pieces are flipped to the blank side. No imagery to fit together. Extremely fascinating to watch. Never seen anything like it. Story 19. Not terribly creepy, but I don't have a lot of opportunities to talk about this. My old roommate and I were once doing something in the kitchen, and one of us dropped something, which then rolled a bit under the oven. Her cat happened to be in the kitchen with us. We said, "Olive, go get it," and pointed to the spot under the oven. Olive looked at the spot for about 3 seconds, then proceeded to walk up and swipe her paw under the oven. My roommate and I immediately looked at each other like, did that actually just happen? Both our jaws were on the floor. Olive did not succeed in retrieving the item, but I still can't believe she did that. Story 20. A guy in Vegas who personalized rings made small talk with me while he used the grinder to carve my nickname into the blank. We didn't talk about where I was from at all, but after a few minutes he asked if I was from the exact city I was born and raised in despite me not having lived there for years prior. I don't think that city is known for having a particular accent, but he still knew. It wasn't really scary, and I figured the guy talked to people from all over the world all day, every day. He just happened to be really good at remembering accents. It was pretty neat. Story 21. Worked with an Australian guy on Op Iraqi freedom until 2006. This guy was a comms tech and noticed every day around lunchtime Baghdad time the fiber cable link back to Australia would degrade, only 15 minutes at a time. He worked it out over a couple of weeks to sunlight in a Singaporean data center, shining through a window onto a router with a failed cooling fan. Would overheat the router and increase the data error rate, slowing the data link. The Royal Mumford, I doff my cap to you, sir. Answer. Reminds me of a story my dad told me. There was a contaminant in the water supply. He examined it and found a specific chemical or something, he's a chemist, that was given off only by specific frogs living in a specific region of our state. Guys drove out to check all the tanks in that area, and sure enough, one had a broken lid, tons of dead frogs in there. Story 22. Not so much creepy as it was startling. My 7-year-old son is gifted. We always knew that he was above average because he could read and do math pretty well when he was 4 years old. But we didn't know exactly how smart he was. His first grade teacher last year gave him a lot of homework. She normally gave each student one worksheet per day, and she gave them all at the same time on a Monday, expecting them back on Friday. For my son, she gave him double the work, and half of it was advanced. Normally, I get home from work after homework is done, so my wife handles it. I hadn't paid that much attention to his schoolwork other than accepting when his teacher proposed that he'd get extra advanced work. One Monday, my wife was out, and I was home with my son trying to get him to do his homework. When I got home, he was playing video games, and I told him he had to get his homework done first. He had a fresh week's worth to do, and even though it wasn't due until Friday, we always wanted to stay ahead of it and have him do 13 per day. He went to the kitchen table with his backpack, and I went to the bathroom. I came out of the bathroom maybe 5 minutes later, and he was playing video games again. I was pretty annoyed and told him that I thought he was supposed to be doing his homework. He didn't even look at me. He just said it's done. I told him there's no way, and again without looking at me continuing to play his game, he confidently just said, check it. I went to the kitchen table and opened his backpack to see a completely finished packet of work. There were 3 or 4 pages of math problems and 2 or 3 stories with all their questions answered. I went through it and everything was correct. In 5 minutes, he did schoolwork that most of his classmates would struggle with getting done in a week. Half of the work was meant for kids in a grade ahead of him. We've since had a few conversations about him skipping a grade but have decided against it. We want him to stay with his friends for now. And our school is pretty accommodating with advanced work when they're in middle and high school. Completing a week's worth of work in 5 minutes is a level of productivity many adults can only dream of. In situations like this, it's very important to find a balance between nurturing an outstanding talent and preserving a normal, carefree childhood. Story 23. She then showed me the fridge and said yes when I asked if she meant the medicine. After eating her medicine, she ended the interaction by pushing all done. Story 24. Miriam. A friend introduced me to her at a party. She was a math major. She had gotten into a bet with her roommate to see who could memorize pi to the most digits. She won by thousands of digits. My friend said, hey, Miriam, do pi. Her eyes went glassy, and she went 3.14159266535. She went on for minutes. Story 25. My 3-year-old reciting the alphabet backwards just a few days after finally figuring it out for the first time the whole way through in the normal direction. Fudge terrifying. Story 26. Pigs. I have a few stories from working on a pig farm, but the scariest was when I was working alone in a field to patch a fence, and one of the big mamas came up to me, thinking Ossabaw mixed sow that an adult man could easily ride. She grabbed my elbow in her mouth. So those stories about pigs going through a body are no joke, and this one has a few 100 pounds on me, and so I kind of froze, then sweetly turned my head and looked her in the eyes and said, hi there, sweetie, please don't eat me. All I could imagine is the other field hand finding my chewed-up steel toes alone. She made direct eye contact with me, and I saw plain as day her considering what to do. She was judging me. Ultimately, she released my arm, took a couple steps, grunted, and leaned against that arm so I could scratch her ears. She had never shown any signs of affection before that, but after that, she was my BFF. Pigs, they're way, way more intelligent than we give them credit for. Story 27. Most intelligent person I've ever known was actually a huge ignorant. He had terrifying brain power, but he had a caveman general knowledge, and personality-wise, he was absolutely the most average young adult douchebag you can possibly imagine. One of those that can only speak about intimacy and football regardless of who they have in front. He single-handedly made half my university course graduate. He would start studying 2 weeks before the exam. 1 week before, he knew the whole program by the fudge word, and he would just act as a professor to a bunch of us. His final average grade was the highest possible grade. As in, he scored maximum grades at every single exam he did. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. I've been with him for the whole process multiple times, and unless he's also the best actor in the world, he genuinely did this in a week. After the university, he went on to rake a buttload of money in various marketing agencies, to then quit everything and put up a pizza place. He's now the owner of a pizza place. Knowing him, he probably acts as the whole management and keeps track of everything that isn't cooking and serving. Story 28. I have a friend who has extreme pattern recognition skills. It's uncanny. She's not socially gifted and is an introvert. She also thinks she might be on the autism spectrum or has OCD. But she can predict people's behavior, the outcomes of relationships, accurately identifies who is a safe person to be around and who isn't. Just very good at understanding human behavior, not so much at talking with people. She'll also get you a present based on some random thing you said 2 years ago, like, we were driving to an Asian food festival in the summer of 2023, and you said you like chili oil with so-and-so ingredients. Story 29. I'm not that smart, but customers used to get really creeped out when I would memorize their credit card number while calling the credit company to get their limit increased. They always wanted the card back, but you'd have to repeat it upwards of 3 times, so I would just memorize it. Trick was that all the retail cards at the store I worked at had the same first 7 digits. Story 30. I witnessed a raccoon successfully navigate a trash can like it was an obstacle course on a game show. If they ever have a reality show for raccoons, that one's definitely getting the golden trash can trophy. Story 31. I wouldn't say creepy, But maybe surprising, my son, 8, is gifted and autistic, and there are constantly things that amaze me. He can give a lecture on particle physics and do huge math problems in his head. He's currently doing algebra for school. The other day he told me that on his current favorite cartoon, there are 47 recurring characters, outside of the main characters and the background extras. I asked how he knew, and he said he just listed them all in his head. This kid was also speaking like an adult at 2 years old and perfectly articulated full sentences. It was so shocking to people who first met him. They would say, "How old are you?" Story 32. This is going to get buried because the thread is huge, but I was once playing Bop It with a bunch of other theater majors. We were not doing well. We were passing it around a circle of us during break at rehearsal when another actor wandered up. "What's that?" she said. We told her. "Can I try?" We handed it over expecting her to immediately fail. We were, after all. Instead, we watched as the toy's instructions to twist it and pull it and whatever increased to a speed never before seen. She kept up with every one. After 15 minutes, Bop It said something like, "You beat me. Well done." "Cool," she said, handed it back to us and walked away. I didn't know, Hop, it is a game you can win. Story 33. My son, at the age of 4 to 6, could add letters. He was horrible with English. He's got severe ADHD. Well, he comes in the living room and says, "Dad, guess what HP is?" I said, "Hewlett Packard?" No, he can add the numeric values of the letters AZ and AZ. 152 uppercase for 126 and lowercase 2752. He still adds words up and gets distracted reading. He reads numbers as words and words as numbers. It's strange, but really cool to see. Answer, dude, you're kidding me. I'm 37 years old and I've done this since I was about 10. I show friends for fun. It never ceases to blow their minds. Not only do I add or deduce the distance between letters, but I can tell you how many letters and punctuation marks are in a sentence within a second of hearing it. I have never found reports of anybody else who do this. This is incredible. Story 34. I met 2 people with eidetic memory, as far as I know. They both had the same habit of answering a question, pausing, looking upwards, as if they were reading something in the air, and then answer. One I met was in the Army. My first meeting with him, he noticed my last name and said, "Oh, that's Japanese." Paused, looked at the ceiling, and then started speaking to me in Japanese. I told him it was a Japanese last name, but I was Mexican-American. Again, he paused, looked up, and then started speaking to me in Spanish. Later, he picked up quite a bit of German in just a couple of months. He was definitely a polyglot. I believe he also became Soldier of the Month 3 months running, but was asked to not do it again. The funniest thing was he had very little social graces. He was a very good-looking guy and always smiled. People would approach him, but after a few minutes they would leave, looking at him like he was an alien. I have to admit, he could have been, but I still miss him. Answer. My grandmother would do this. Look up before speaking to you. She spoke 6 languages fluently. After reading your comment, I now believe she was making sure to speak the correct language. At the end of her life, no one could understand what she was saying because dementia caused her to speak in all her languages. The only nurse capable of taking care of her was a Haitian lady, only because she understood English, French, and German. My grandmother spoke Latvian, Russian, German, English, French, and Yiddish. Story 35. Working for a city in traffic engineering, we had a large map on a wall where we would place pins with colored heads to represent types of accidents from police accident reports. For example, pedestrian-related, property damage only, passing, etc. Instead of bringing the stack of reports and working out each pin in exact location individually, one legendary lady would go in and stick the pins from memory. This was not a small city. One engineer was incredulous and asked how she could remember so many. She became offended when he checked her work and found she got everyone right. I didn't witness it, but I believe him, and I can't imagine how she did it. Story 36. Like I'll tell him something and he'll say he knows and then tells me the exact day and place we were when I told him what else we were talking about and how it came up. This is things from like 4 years ago. It's kind of nuts. Like he has to pretend to not know things about people because people get weirded out. But ever since I told him to not do that with me, it's really great. Like I can talk to him about a friend I haven't mentioned in a year, and he'll just know everything about them. It's like he just has the encyclopedic knowledge of everything anyone's ever told him. Answer, I do this. Well, at a much higher level than most other people. And I never really lose things. I can almost always remember where something is. Good to know it can be weird. I generally just say, yeah, I know, but don't go into the detail. But a quick look at a calendar, I can recall the date. Story 37. I know a guy who'd go up to women in clubs and say, "Tell me your name and I'll tell you your postcode." He was a postman. Answer. A friend of mine has really good memory with numbers. He said that every time he met some women in a bar, he grabs his phone, type the number and save, but he doesn't need to do that since he memorized instantly. He started grabbing his phone just because every time a woman said her number and he said, "Okay, I memorized," they would say, "You are a weirdo," and never answer messages back. Story 38. I was 19, tutoring a little boy after school in my town. Super quiet, always watching. One day I joked, "You're scary smart." And he replied, completely calm, "You touch your necklace when you're lying." I froze. He never noticed that. Then he added, "You won't be here long anyway." 2 weeks later, I moved away for uni. Still don't know how he knew. Story 39. I don't know if it counts as creepy, but my old music mentor is a polyglot who triple majored at Yale in his early teens. He has various sorts of command of over 20 languages. When I was working with him, he got permission unheard of for white dudes to enter the inner sanctum of the holiest Zoroastrian sites in India and Iran to study their texts and eventually set them to music. I house sat for him while he was gone. When he came back, I asked him when he'd found time to learn the language, because he's always busy AF, plus the whole dead language aspect. "Oh, I just studied it on the plane." "How are my cats? Don't be late to rehearsal tonight." I had another mentor who could extemporize anything on the guitar. Like, he'd reference a passage in a violin concerto and just start playing a reduction of it on the guitar. Sometimes he'd transpose it to be in the same key of whatever I was studying. And I saw him play a piece from memory after hearing it once. He didn't glance at the score at all. The score was a recently discovered 19th century piece that he hadn't heard of before. This happened in a masterclass I attended. Story 40. Grew up in a house with a female cat that had been around since my siblings and I were little. She would use combinations of trills and meows to make cat approximations of our names that were close enough that we knew when she was calling a specific sibling. If we didn't respond or start coming downstairs when my mother would call us from downstairs, the cat would post up at the bottom of the stairs, trill meowing the person's name, or come into their room and do it in their face until they followed. Seemed perfectly normal to us, but I had friends that were definitely creeped out by my cat saying my name. Story 41. I'm pretty sure the local crows all have a specific bird word for people. They make the same noise whenever they see a person, and it's different from the noises they make when seagulls of hawks turn up. Story 42. I was working inpatient psychiatric care. One of the younger clients was extremely difficult to understand, had a laundry list of DXs that all indicated serious mental health issues, as well as suspected developmental delays. It was extensive and the level of care was exhausting for everyone. I had started to work third shift before my first shift, so they couldn't force me to work when I needed to be elsewhere during second shift times because people started calling in to avoid being assigned this client during second especially. History of foster placements, lots of missing info from birth families, not a ton of info from anything prior to current placement. IYYKYK. I was doing room checks at intervals. Going around, it was probably 2 or 3 in the morning, checking on the younger clients. As I approached this client's room, I hear talking that didn't match the client, but I didn't recognize. It was clear and understandable. Out of curiosity, I stopped to listen. It was clearly someone speaking to themselves, and as I listened further, I was floored. It sounds like someone is scheming. The one that has the laundry list of serious DXs that indicate this is impossible. Client was talking about how they are doing a good job with the plan, and they just needed to keep it up to get what they wanted. These sorts of things. I finally was too unnerved and thought, okay, there has to be another kid in there that snuck in while I was taking care of laundry, so I come in and hit the lights, expecting to be like, what the heck? Get back to bed. Nope, only one was the client. I asked what was up, why out of bed, and it was right back to the typical speech pattern. When I asked about the speaking I heard, the client ignored me. I spoke to the therapist, psych, facility management, literally anyone that would listen. This kid has something far more serious going on and has somehow managed to pull the wool over everyone's eyes. No one believed me. I started to think I had some sort of exhaustion-based delusion. I was working on average 90 hours a week at the time. I stopped trying to get others to look into it, and I stopped asking the kid why he wouldn't just interact with others and decided it was likely just me desperately needing more sleep. Discharge comes up for the client. As a floor person, I help pack, etc. Spent part of the day prior to discharge packing the room of everything except a change of clothes for the next day. I was working third that night, doing room checks. come to the client's room. Client is standing in the room. It was probably 1:30-ish. I asked bathroom, snack, water, typical stuff for why young kid might be just standing. It was dark, so it's just a silhouette. I finally flick the light on when the client doesn't answer, and the client is standing there with this weird look on their face, kind of smug, but off. Client says something to the effect of, "No one will ever believe you, and I'll get my way just like always." I remember just being like, "Okay, but do you need anything? Because I've got stuff to take care of." That seemed to deflate the client, and the rest of my shift went off without a hitch. I've been in the field in varying degrees for decades, and this is one of the handful of things that I found really disturbing. This person was much younger than anyone would likely believe, and was playing a system that was supposed to recognize this sort of stuff. I don't know what the end goal was or why, but it was certainly disturbing. I don't recall if psych testing had been done, but our facility director, counselor, therapy director, and psychiatry director all thought I was making it up or was stressed, tired. I've had a lot of things happen that no one thinks possible, real, because mental illness is unpredictable, to say the least. But this is one that really had me freaked out. That young of a person being able to manipulate adult professionals. What is that person doing now? That's what I find frightening, creepy. This story really makes you wonder how much can be hidden behind the masks people wear for others. The chilling level of insight and the ability to manipulate the system at such a young age raise serious questions about what else might be hidden in that person's mind. Story 43. This happened after the company I was working for was acquired by another massive company. The CEO of the new ownership company was in town for the first time, meeting the team and such. 200 people in this single office. For reference, this guy already had 1,200 employees, so we were all certainly just a number. This dude waltzed into the sales bullpen and... Story 44. I used to work in a psychiatric hospital. We had a patient on my unit who could tell you what day of the week you were born if you gave him your birth date. I got sick of hearing him brag about this, so I gave him my birth date, my brother's birth date, and a couple other people. Turns out he was not lying. Dude was like a supercomputer. Story 45. Girl I worked with knew the lyrics of any song I played, even obscure random songs. She knew them word for word, different genres and everything. Story 46. It's like that one scene in TBBT when that North Korean prodigy saw Sheldon's dry erase board and immediately figured out the mistake. When I was working on my thesis, a Chinese international student from a totally different field came to get something from me, saw my board, and 30 seconds later, solved a mistake that was bothering me for a week. That's when I realized I'm not going to make it with research and focused on teaching instead. Story 47. I used to be friends with someone who's a talented hacker. He mostly worked to find vulnerabilities in security systems to collect bounties in return. One day he showed me the less legal side of what he could do if he wanted to, and it was crazy. Taught me a lot about how vulnerable devices, etc. can be. It all admittedly scared me a bit, as he could easily ruin someone's life if he decided to. I wouldn't have wanted to piss him off at any point, that's for sure. TBH, I'm pretty glad we don't talk anymore. LOL. Answer, I have a friend who's exactly the same. Extremely talented hacker and programmer. When he showed me a program he built and the records of what he had done with it, I was blown away. He'd hacked the personal phone of a warlord in Libya and had broken into high-security government networks without ever being detected. He didn't do anything malicious or destructive. He just wanted to prove to himself that he could do it. I knew right then and there that I would never piss him off. Thankfully, he's a nice guy, and I've known him a long time, so we have no reason to beef. Story 48. I used to know a violin player that had absolute hearing. He could tell exactly what notes someone was playing on whatever instrument, but also absolute memory. After hearing a song once, he could play it. Incredible to watch, listen to. Story 49. It was our pet Cairn Terrier. It wasn't creepy, though. It just made me laugh. I was sat on the sofa, and she was scratching my leg, making barky, growly noises in play. I asked what, and she went over to one of her toys. She scratched at it as though she couldn't get to it because it kept rolling back under a cabinet. So I got up, and as soon as I did, she ran to my seat with her tail wagging and jumped up to claim the nice warm spot. It was so crafty, I was rather impressed. Answer, my border collie did this too. He wasn't very barky, super smart, and when I was training him as a pup, I quickly realized he was actually training me. He would go bark at the front door to alert me to someone knocking, only for me to find nobody there. And he got the warm spot on the couch, looking very pleased with himself and refused to budge. He just manipulated me to move so he could have his favorite part of the couch. And I fell for it every time. The same little shoot went through a chewing furniture phase, and after he stopped, when he wanted a treat at exactly the same time every day, and I didn't get it for him, he would gently place his teeth over a chair leg or table leg while holding eye contact like he was negotiating with me. When I was training him to do drop it, with the method of swapping whatever was in his mouth for something else, he figured out if he wanted something I had, all he had to do was to find something to drop at my feet. One day I was eating Pringles, and for that he kind of panicked, and that day I got one plastic plant pot, one sock, and a toy train to exchange for a Pringle. I miss him. Love you, Rio. Story 50. I once saw a video of a crow using a piece of bread as bait. It didn't eat the bread. It just dropped it in the water and waited for a fish to surface so it could catch something bigger. That kind of intentional multi-step planning in an animal is genuinely unsettling. Story 51. I do work a lot with IBM servers that run AIX as OS. We followed courses about that AIX to enhance our knowledge about it. During one of those courses, we had an instructor who could read hexadecimal code off the top of his head as if it were a natural language. For those of you who do not know what hexadecimal code is, it is a language format for software executables like Word or Excel, produced by compilers. It is machine code not meant to be read by humans, but intended for the AIX or Windows OS, for example, and/or the computer it runs on. We all had a jaw-dropping moment, and then he told us that it was nothing compared to what a colleague of his at IBM was capable of. The person he referred to was responsible for writing the very first machine code to bootstrap the AIX OS on brand new hardware that had never run code before. He did that for each new type of machine, hardware within a couple of hours. Truly rocket science to write code for a machine that no one had ever written code for before. Some people see the world through numbers and code in a completely different way than most of us. Reading hexadecimal code like plain text is a rare gift that turns a person into a living bridge between human consciousness and machine language. Story 52. A pet parrot, specifically a blue gold macaw. My then-girlfriend and I fostered him. He lived with us for about a year. There were 3 days over the Xmas holidays when we would both be out of town. One of my friends from university agreed to take care of him. He was late coming over the first day, so we gave the bird some treats, putting them in a small stainless steel dish on top of the cage. He climbs up, grabs the dish, and throws all the treats on the floor. My buddy gets down on his hands and knees to pick them up, and the bird throws the dish, which hits him on the head. He says, "Ow," and the bird laughed. Answer. One of the budgies I had when I was a young teen would inform you of his annoyance with nail clippings by biting you in the same spot over and over very quickly to maximize the sensitivity of the bitten spot. He was otherwise very polite and aloof, but if he was being held, he made sure you knew he was mad. He also loved buzzing the back of people's heads. One of the ones I have now acts like he's obsessed with his girlfriend, but if any of the other birds in a flock of 10 end up somewhere they shouldn't be, he freaks out, starts calling, and if I'm accessible, he comes and circles me and yells until I go see who went missing and rescue them. Story 53. Had a friend who could guess the exact time without checking a phone or watch, like down to the minute. They would just pause and say it and be right. It sounds small, but it always gave me a weird chill. Story 54. I knew a woman who worked in a school and often helped out with the special needs kids. She felt pregnant and wasn't sure how to play it with work, in case they tried to steer her when to use her maternity leave, treated her differently or whatever. Basically, she was keeping it a secret from her boss. But the autistic kids knew she was pregnant well before she was showing. She said they were generally nonverbal and didn't pick up on social cues, but 2 of them started greeting her by name, which they had never previously done, and putting an ear to her stomach. I remember the way she told me just gave me goosebumps, like there's some element of humanity that's detectable, but only to people deeply on the autism spectrum, like some sort of real-life ghost story. Story 55. Gene Simmons picked my accent as not only Australian, but Melburnian specifically, when I'd only said about 3 words to him. Fudge Australians can't even do that. Answer. I lived in Dubai as a child and attended an international school. International schools tend to give you a weird, Americanized but with some RP transatlantic accent, no matter where the school. My cousins attended an IS in Singapore. A friend attended one in the Lebanon, and their accents were very similar to mine. We moved to the UK when I was 10, so I could take the 11 and have a British secondary education, and I worked to drop the accent. At 40, I was chatting to a guy, and he swiftly not only clocked the trace of an IS accent, but guessed I'd grown up in the UAE. Not only did that strike me speechless, but I ended up barely talking for the rest of the evening as I was overanalyzing everything that came out of my mouth. Story 56. Not really creepy, but I noticed there must be something going on. I was on holidays in a Turkish wakeboard park. They have some dogs there, which were strays but living there in the park now. Super friendly doggos. One morning we wanted to get up a hill for the sunrise. When we stepped out, 2 of the dogs slept in front of our house. They woke up and immediately understood what we were up to. They'd lead the way up the hill. When we were up there, one of them was sitting down and staring into the sunrise with me. Nothing else. He just looked at the shiny orb in the skies. This dog was not led by food, companionship, or anything. He was just there, probably admiring the sunrise too. Nothing a dull animal would be able to. Story 57. My husband grew up in a bad area, bad family. High school dropout. BC school was so bad for people with learning disabilities. He grew up truly believing he was stupid. I'm a writer, and he would never read. Complained that he couldn't read. Not a lack of ability, but he apparently has that thing where you can't visualize in your head, but no word for it 30 years ago, and I didn't even realize that was a possible thing. He just told me he can't see the story like I can, so it doesn't make any sense for him. He found it difficult and pointless. Then at 20 years old, he sat down and read a college chemistry textbook left at our house in one evening and literally taught himself chemistry. I was a gifted student with a full scholarship, and chemistry was where I got lost AF. I could not understand what I was seeing. I don't have to imagine with this book. It just explains. Easiest book I've ever seen. Story 58. My 5-year-old son taught himself to recognize flags, provinces, some capitals, countries just by being interested. He has a lot of interest, but is really interested in vexillology geography right now. He knows maybe 90 of flags and countries from exploring Google Earth, watching geography videos, using the app Cetera, talking my ear off with a million questions, trying to memorize Yako's world, and always want to hear it sung in other languages like Malagasy. We did a 300-piece jigsaw puzzle of flags over Christmas, and he recognized Albania, Seychelles, Malaysia flag by seeing a corner, or a little bit of Fiji in a thumbnail in his atlas, a doorstopper, of another country because he could see some of Australia and associated small islands with being Fiji. He's gifted in other ways like counting to 100 and back to 1 when he was 3, but can't read yet. Shockingly, he is not autistic. He's had some oppositional defiance, but we have support for him. He has a lot of friends, loves to play Minecraft, makes rainbow looms with his friends that could circle the earth. Normal kid, but insanely ahead in STEM. We don't draw attention to it because he'll always be smart and we'll challenge him. Story 59. Well, when I was back in college, a random guy texted me on Instagram, and since my account was private, I did not see the other inbox where these texts go in. After almost a week, I noticed someone had texted. He did not look familiar, so I asked if I knew him from somewhere. He said no, but I know you, and then he told me that he saw me around my college campus, got my vehicle's number, and put that in the road tickets website, and got my name, and then looked it up on Instagram, and sent me a text because he thought I was cute. It was creepy, but at the same time, I was amazed that this was even possible. Answer. I had a similar experience a couple of years ago where I got a friend request on Snapchat from a stranger. I was curious, and he ended up telling me how he saw my profile on Tinder, saw which university I attended, looked through all the university's Facebook followers until he found my profile, then asked other alumni for my Snapchat handle. Creepy stuff. Story 60. I lived in a small mountain town where all the mail service is through P.O. boxes. I left for 13 years and came back. At a different venue, I saw the lady who'd been the main postal officer. I filled out a form, and on seeing my name, she remembered my P.O. box number. There are more than 10,000 P.O. boxes. Story 61. Asked a lad at work on the fly if we're allowed compound bows in the UK. Lad then told us all the weights and weapons we are allowed the country, like straight off the bat. Story 62. One of my close relatives is a very smart person, but has a hellish personality. She speaks a couple of different languages, has helped universities with forgotten ancient dialects, and has some pretty impressive talents with artistry. Only issue is that she's a diagnosed sociopath with psychopathic tendencies. We lived in the same house a couple of years ago. I was upset about something my mom did, so I went to her to talk about it. She said some not so nice things about the situation, and then concluded the conversation by getting eerily quiet. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You know what makes me different? I can be whatever someone needs me to be in the moment and feel nothing of it. If you need me to be sad, I can be sad. If you need me to be angry, I can be angry. If you need me to be nice, I can try and be nice. But it's all a facade because I don't really care like that," and proceeded to laugh like it was some weird joke to her. I had known that this relative wasn't the best person, but any superhero idolization I had for her ever since I was a kid immediately disappeared after she said that to me. Creepiest show of intelligence I've personally experienced, especially since she tricked me into a lot of things so effortlessly. Story 63. Dark triad people are interesting, and they seem to like me. If you notice one and talk to them about it in a friendly and non-judgmental way, it's amazing what they'll tell you and the casualness in how they'll describe it. I remember one of them telling me how she would notice almost immediately the little things that would make someone respond positively and negatively. Then she could pick up the patterns that people followed in their interactions with others and how she could very systematically pepper those positive and negative triggers in to gain trust, attention, sympathy, etc., and how she could sow disfavor on others if it suited her. What's doubly weird is that these people will still try to use these tactics on you even after they've explained them. Doubly entertaining that they could be sobbing or screaming or happy one moment in feigned emotion, and if you call them out in private, a switch will flip when they realize you're not falling for it. Answer: I have an old friend I've known for years who is a sociopath a bit like this. When we were in our 20s, I openly told him I thought he was a sociopath in, as you say, a non-judgmental way. He never fully acknowledged it out loud, but we have a sort of quiet understanding. He is a very charming, confident, and outgoing person who can be incredibly funny. I am careful about the ways I expose myself to him, but we are still friends if that's possible. I feel a sort of loyalty to him from knowing him so long. I don't think we chose or can be blamed for our brain makeup either, and under most circumstances, he is manageable. He used to work in hedge fund finance, but was unable to motivate himself to put the necessary work in and eventually got fired, leading to financial issues. Story 64. I grew up in Middle America, and one day in government class, our teacher was asking us to name whole countries, and none of us could. He brought up the new kid who had just moved from Russia and gave him a laser and started rattling off countries. Kid knew all the countries. The teacher was sweating and then got on his computer because he himself didn't know all of the capitals. So he then asked all of the capitals, and bro knew all of them. Then he got deeper and started naming random cities, and kid knew all of them. Maybe this is normal for non-USA education, but that boy was our Matilda after that moment. Answer: in 7th grade, we were required to learn all of the countries of the world, their capitals, and how to say hello and goodbye in a few languages. Of course, we also had to know all of the U.S. states and capitals. We're in the U.S. Maybe that kid had gone through a class like that. I'm a bit shocked no one else in your class could name even a few countries. Story 65. Back in the late 90s, I worked for a business software company. We had this executive who used to work as a rocket scientist, missile guidance system software engineer. We took him to all of the company pitches because at the end of each meeting, while his computer was still connected to the AV so everyone could see, he would start taking verbatim notes from the meeting while continuing to answer their questions at the same time. Didn't miss a beat in either his note-taking or his question answering. Now that I'm typing this out, it doesn't seem that creepy, but to see it was kind of unreal. Story 66. In the 90s, I met Kim Peek, the inspiration for Rain Man, at a Denny's one evening. He was dining with his parents. We began talking, and you could tell him your name, and he could tell you your phone number and address. Or you could give him a local phone number, and he would tell you the name and address of the number. He had memorized the entire content of the local phone book. It was unbelievable. Story 67. Nile crocodiles learn people's schedules. When you fetch water, when you do laundry in the river, when children play in the water. Humans aren't their primary prey, but they remember your routine, so when they feel like it, they'll be waiting for you before you even arrive at your usual spot. They don't make a fuss either. There's plenty of stories of them just quietly pulling one child in a group of swimmers under to drown, and nobody even notices until later. Africa has dozens of reported crocodile attacks per year. Most of them fatal as they're just crocodiles feeding. And based on the number of people that go missing around the water, only a minority of attacks go reported. Even if the river seems perfectly calm, something is probably memorizing your routine. Story 68. In my freshman year of college, I had a little group who watched movies on Tuesdays on campus. Afterward, we would usually meet at a coffee shop and hang. One of them was in his 60s, was retired, and was generally unassuming. We knew he had been a professor at some point. One day, we were doing our thing in the coffee shop. He excuses himself and wanders over to another table where he starts speaking some Eastern European language fluently. One of our crew was a pretty paranoid guy, and he half-jokingly accused him of being in the KGB, and it became a running joke. Not long after that, I bumped into our bilingual friend, and he says, "Don't tell that guy because he will just go wild with it." He then explains to me that he used to in intelligence during the Cold War, and his job was to listen in on radio communications in Eastern Europe and Russia. He became a Slavic languages professor, and that was how he ended up in the Midwest where we were. The same guy, in 2003 or so, used to hang on Slavic-speaking message boards on Yahoo and commented to us that he noticed that there seemed to be users talking to themselves or using numerous accounts per person. We thought he was nuts, but I thought a lot about him when the troll farms were revealed. Story 69. I'm actually the one who did it. People underestimate me a lot in life, and I have learned to use it to my advantage when the other person deserves it. I had a coworker who was an awful person and thought he was smarter than he was. He invited all of the young new people in the office, not the older people who were good at poker and could afford to lose money to a cash game of poker at his place. Obviously, we were afraid of the career ramifications of offending a more senior person in the office, so we all said yes, even though we had all just graduated and had no savings and were still paying off student debt and really couldn't afford to be playing this level of poker. So a real scumbag move, trying to fleece vulnerable people, especially because him and his wife were both playing in the same game and colluding. Anyways, he was always very condescending to me at work and seemed to take the fact that I never corrected the idiotic things he said as me being stupid. So I played into that image he had of me during the poker game, sometimes visibly reacting to my hand if it was bad, and I was going to fold anyways. Accidentally string betting and getting called on it to reinforce I had no idea what I'm doing. Calling to show a kind of mid-hand if it was cheap to do, so I could give the impression I didn't understand the differences between PLO and Texas Hold'em. In PLO, you'll get better-seeming hands more frequently than Hold'em, but so will everyone else so nearly. The best hands will frequently not be the best hand. Eventually, I got what I was waiting for, the nut hand on a really promising board. He and his wife had been colluding in some hands to push other people out by pot raising several times, and then one of them folding so nobody saw the winning hand, which is suspicious as hell and not very subtle. So I slow-played the hell out of my nut straight flush and hemmed and hawed like it was a tough decision whenever they'd pot raise. They took the bait and kept raising until we were all in, their stupid fudge faces when I turned over my hand and grinned at them like a jackass. The most satisfying hand of poker I've ever played, and the most money I've walked out of a cash game with. Also, my coworker avoided me at work after that, which was actually the best thing to come out of that game. Story 70. A former manager of mine, in the course of one presentation, spoke 8 different languages fluently, answered questions from visitors who spoke those 8 languages, and the presentation was on silicon wafer development in etching for computer chips. For fun, she was getting her doctorate in mathematics. In a company full of smart people, she was a rock star. Story 71. Please note he worked in finance and made crazy money. Just interesting to watch someone not want to win every nickel they could. Answer. It's not gambling if you don't lose. It's just work. That's what a friend of my father's said. When I was a teenager, we moved to an island in the Caribbean where my dad worked for a constructing company, building a resort and casino. My father's friend, I don't remember his name, let's call him Bob, gave him a book on beating the house at blackjack. I can't remember the name of the book, but I can see the cover in my mind's eye. It wasn't cheating or counting cards, just an algorithm for any hand you could be dealt. If you have X and Y cards, that's some hit. If the dealer gives you a Z, hit. But if it was another X, stay, etc., you'd still lose plenty, but supposedly, if you followed the system religiously, you'd win 5 more hands than you'd lose. My father went to play a few nights a week, never betting more than he could afford to, and walking away when he'd bet the few hundred he'd brought with him. I don't play, so I don't know how much you bet a hand, but let's say he brought 200 and each ante up was a 10 chip. Any hands he won, those chips went in a separate pile, and when the first pile of 200 ran out, he left. We'd know he had a good night because we'd wake to the box of donuts he'd bring home if he won. Over the summer, he accumulated a small pile of winnings. I think he came out maybe 3,000 ahead, and then we moved away to somewhere without casinos. But Bob, my dad's friend, the one who gave him the book, was the interesting one. A compulsive gambler, Bob was sometimes flush, but not for long, and frequently broke, of course. Sometimes, when he had no money and no food, he'd come over for dinner. We always fed him. For a compulsive gambler, Bob had a pretty good system for minimizing harm. Had his regular paycheck, 40 HRs per week, sent home to his family, never even saw it, and he lived on and gambled with his overtime pay. My dad asked Bob if he'd read the book and knew the system. Of course, Bob said. So why don't you use it? Why don't you win slow but steady like I do? Bob asked in turn. Why don't you go every night? Or quit your job and just play cards? It's sort of boring, my dad said. There's no thrill to it if you aren't making outrageous or even slightly risky bets. It's just rote work with free drinks. If A, then do B. Sip on a vodka tonic. If G, then do L. Rinse, repeat. Exactly, said Bob. What's the fun in that? An interesting example of human psychology. Sometimes the process and the thrill matter much more than a guaranteed win. It's a clear illustration of how the need for excitement can easily outweigh even the most accurate mathematical logic. Story 72. I have synesthesia, which some people find really bizarre. It manifests for others not always the same. Some see things like music as colors in their brains. I see people's names as different colors. Some have even tested me thinking I'm BSing them, but the names always appear as specific colors in my mind. Story 73. When I was a teen, was babysitting for special needs group of my church. Kid was drawing what seemed like random lines on a piece of paper with random numbers attached at each line, and a random red dot circle in the middle. She gave it to me at the end of church. Thought it was cute. Had no idea WTF it was. A few weeks later, I realized it was a map of the surrounding area with all the street name numbers. She was 5. Story 74. A historian I know was scheduled to do an 80-minute talk about the Gulf War in the 90s at a university. He had done many of them before, but still had to have his notes in front of him during the talk, because it is just impossible to remember 100 of the information in that moment, and also mention it when it makes sense, or so he believed. When he shows up, he sees posters about an upcoming talk by political activist linguist Noam Chomsky, and it has the Gulf War on the poster. He decides to check this one out after his own talk, and it turns out that the university had made a blunder. Chomsky was booked for a QA. However, a lot of the audience expected Gulf War talk. So Chomsky says, I can give you the textbook version before I add some personal remarks. He then goes on to give an identical speech in front of the historian, while he is checking his own notes to double-check if Chomsky is forgetting anything, but no. Totally unprepared to speak on this. No notes in front of him. Story 75. My son has creeped me out a few times. Used to complete all his puzzles face down without using the pictures, just the shapes. Solves his Rubik's Cube, teaches feet. Helps put any IKEA furniture or box furniture together by flipping through the instructions one time quickly and never referencing them again. Memorize lists and huge passages of books. Just when you get excited that you're living with a genius, you see him come in from school and notice his shirt is inside out and backwards. How did you not address this at some point during the day? Answer: it's about what's important to him. I was the same way growing up, and I realized that I'm a lazy perfectionist. That is, there's 3 priority levels to everything I'm responsible for. Either not important enough to do, important enough to do the absolute bare minimum, or important enough to make perfect. Landing in any gray area is a waste of time and effort. Story 76. While I was in college in the 90s, I got hired by our local school district's summer camp at the last minute. I had a few friends that worked there, and they realized they had a problem kid that needed a counselor just to watch him. Kid was a sociopath, and I was an untrained 19-year-old. We realized the easiest thing to do was let him play in the computer lab all day. He asked the teacher in the lab if he could bring games in from home to play on her PC, as he was bored with the school games on Apple II Twin. She let him, and soon realized that he deleted all her personal files to make his games run faster, but not before he deleted the computer's calendar and clock to attempt to keep it from being traced back to him. He was 9. I remember thinking this kid is growing up to be a comic book villain. Story 77. My dad had an engineer friend, and on one visit we went out for pizza. I was about 14. The adults drank beer, and this guy must have downed 4 or 5 pictures of beer himself. He looked and acted tipsy, and we all had a good time. We went back to his house, and he turned into a completely different person. He sat me down at a computer he built himself and proceeded to teach me basic programming. He went from a wild man downing pictures of beer to a computer professor at the flip of a switch. I will never forget that man or that night. Story 78. I worked with a guy who could look at a complex corner where sheets of drywall intersected, then cut a 3D piece of plastic molding without measuring, drawing anything, that would slide onto each piece, perfectly covering each corner. Maybe it was a practice skill, but he generally struck me as highly intelligent with off-the-charts spatial reasoning skills, which I feel like are underappreciated on the spectrum of human cognitive abilities. Story 79. I think this sub and I have very different understandings of the word creepiest. I was thinking sociopathic stuff, and here I'm reading stuff about normal intelligent people doing intelligent things. Story 80. A guy I was friends with ended up working in a car yard. It wasn't a big brand one, just a small family-owned secondhand car yard. Guy did okay in school, wasn't a genius, wasn't an idiot. I dropped in to visit him at work after he'd been working there for about 6 years, and his boss called out asking if he could remember a car and added the registration number, no description or anything. And my mate rattled off the car's details, the name of the person who traded it in, what they bought, and who bought it by name but phrased it as a question. You mean the blue Toyota whatever, with the such and such, that so-and-so came in with, etc. This had all happened about 6 months after he'd started there. He clearly found his place. For clarity, the car his boss was asking about had been sold 5.5 years earlier. And no, not creepy, like they're going to put you in a pit and make you put lotion on. Just a moment of realizing someone you'd known your whole childhood suddenly pulls a Rain Man out of nowhere. Yes, he's most likely on the spectrum. It's probably why we were friends in the first place. Answer. His boss called out asking if he could remember a car. You mean the blue Toyota with a 1.6L engine that misfired on the third cylinder when it was below 12 degrees Celsius? Bought by that guy named Jerry, who had a bit of a stutter, and so he came in with his mother with the stutter in her step due to her one leg being shorter than the other? No, sorry, I don't remember.